Hello. Thank you all for coming to our second Navigating Publication session. This is entitled Making Contact, Working with Book Editors, Reviewers, and Readers. So I'm Krista Kennedy. I'm an Associate Professor of Writing and Rhetoric at Syracuse University. And we have here five editors from the central presses in the field. Aurora Bell, who is Acquisitions Editor at South Carolina. Jenny Bay, who is editor of the Lauer series in Rhetoric and Composition at Parler, along with Dave Blakesley, who is publisher at Parler. Brian Peterson, who is acquisitions editor at Penn State, and Dan Waterman, who is editor-in-chief at Alabama. Also, before we get started, I would like to thank the people behind the scenes who make all the gears turn to make these sessions happen. And they include Jen Malkowski, who is our outreach officer, Jeff Clegg and Eric Detweiler, who are our digital communications officers, and always Kathy Zisa, who has handled the registration, all of the email blast, and a lot of the logistics for this. So thank you all. So our plan, as always for these sessions, is 30 minutes of conversation, and that's followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function rather than the chat, because that sends all of your questions into a channel for us and it makes it so much easier to manage. And then after the hour is over, we'll be moving to individual rooms, and you can join any of those if you'd like to and chat with editors. So we'll go ahead and get started. Really, our first question, I think, is how should an aspiring author or an established author think about audience when you're conceptualizing a book project? Because there are multiple audiences at multiple stages of creating a book. So who wants to get us started with that? How about Jenny?
Oh, wow. Thanks.
No pressure.
No pressure. Thanks for that. I think, we're all rhetoricians here, right? So audience should be front and center as one of the most important factors that we're thinking about when we're writing. And of course, most of us are writing to our field, right? Some of us are writing beyond our field. So I think one of the things that is a challenge is figuring out the balance between those two things, right? Because none of us is writing to the world, right? You might write a proposal and think every field is going to benefit from my book, but in reality, that's not the case. It's probably going to be the particular field of rhetoric and writing, or rhetoric and composition, or rhetoric and theory, however you want to perceive it, and maybe some fingers out beyond that, right? So I think you have to be very, very careful of that and make sure you have this balance between understanding where your book is in conversation with the field and how far beyond it's going to go realistically. Dave, would you like to follow up with that?
That was a great response, and I love the idea of keeping things fairly focused, but recognizing that there are fingers that may reach out further. That's a nice way to put it. I grew up reading Peter Elbow many moons ago, who always said, "Ignore your audience." But I think he was talking about a different kind of writing situation, the kind where you're really focused on generating content and learning your subject matter so that you have some authority over it. But with publishing, there comes a point past that when you do have to think about who you're writing to and what they're going to get from it. Generally, my experience is that people tend to focus maybe a little bit too narrowly when they're thinking about their audience, addressing their audience. And I would encourage you, but some of this depends on the topic, but to think broadly. If somebody's maybe on the fringe of your reach, what are they going to pull away from your book? What might they take home to their own areas of study, and maybe on a discussion list say, you really ought to read Jenny Bay's book on this during summer vacation. We do that all the time in our field. We refer to books written in other fields that would be really good for us to read. Maybe think about things that way. You know, how might your book be a good summer read for somebody who's a little bit out there from your directed audience? I'll pass it to Ryan. I think has got some great ideas just waiting to get out there.
Well, thanks a lot, Dave. And yeah, I think both of your and Jenny's advice is very good, and I would agree with that. I think maybe just to get maybe a little bit more specific or a little bit more particular, we encourage authors to, especially if they're writing a monograph, to try and frame, say, the problem of the study or the thesis of the study in a way that would appeal to scholars working within the field broadly, as opposed to, say, one focused subfield or a couple subfields. I think it's okay if most of the analysis and, you know, is maybe suited for a smaller group, but I think if the framing kind of maybe, as you were kind of saying, Dave, kind of appeals to scholars working in the field broadly, and even, you know, if you can kind of grab readers who are in related fields with the way that you frame the problem or the way that you set up the study, I think that's really good, just to try and take your research, I think, into different fields, especially because the disciplines are so siloed right now. I think would be a good thing.
Anyone else want to add to that? Aurora, I think you're muted.
Sure am. I would love to sort of jump on the audience question and pivot it in a slightly different direction, which is to talk about the difference between the audience for your proposal versus the manuscript itself, and that some of the people in this room, as it were, are trained in rhetoric, and some of us read a lot of rhetoric proposals and manuscripts, but are not necessarily formally trained in the same way. And in all cases, those proposals are then going to a lot of other audiences, whether that is a marketing department or a press committee or editorial board that has members from across the humanities, members who, you know, maybe are a director of libraries or other sort of stakeholders and constituents. So thinking, as you pose this question, posing it in a way that's not only speaking to the broader field, but also doing so in a way that convinces an informed non-expert that this is sort of important and worthwhile and what that intervention is that you're making.
I think so. And that points us toward another question. And this was a really good question that we got in our first session that I wanted to make sure carried over into this one. So if you were one of the people that asked us in the last one, thank you. And that was, can we talk about the difference in the role between acquisitions and series editors, who are two of those really early audiences, especially when you're at the proposal stage for a book? And I know that different presses also think about this slightly differently. We have a cat.
We have a cat. Sorry, everyone. Visitor.
So Dan, do you want to start us off with that?
Sure. I oversee a lot of series, 3 of them in rhetoric, but I also oversee series in literary criticism, Judaic studies, Southern history, although I'm doing less of that. What else? Public memory, military history. So I have series editors that I work with in a lot of different fields, and my relationships with them are all very different. One of the questions is, why would a press start a series, and what does it mean? And I think once a press either has a critical mass of books in a certain field or a subject area, and they seem to be orbiting around one another in a similar way, Oftentimes we will think about formalizing a series into which other books could go that are akin in nature to those. And by tapping one or two or more senior scholars in the field who have expertise in that area, we're doing a couple of, and the other thing we always try to do is we always establish an advisory board of anywhere from 8 to 12 other scholars who can advise the one or two principal series editors. It's a recruiting tool in a lot of ways. It's a calling card for the press to be able to say, this is an area in which we're heavily invested, so much so that we've got this group of scholars who are helping us curate our list, not only by looking at the books we're considering for publication, but by going out and being advocates for their own series. And I think that they're very helpful. Series editors operate very differently. It's a wide spectrum. I work with some series editors who are very hands-off. The proposals generally come to me. If the series editor likes it, I ask them for some suggestions, and the next time they hear about it, it's been approved by our editorial board. I work with other series editors at the other end of the spectrum who are very closely involved, are often the point of first contact for our press and an author. They're the ones at the series editor is at the conference, is having those conversations. I'm having them too, but this person knows specifically who they want to go after. And then they make me aware that they're having this conversation, and I come into the picture as the need arises to help them talk about submitting a proposal, to explain the peer review process, all the steps that they can expect to follow. And really with the majority of the series editors I work with, it's just a lot of give and take. It's just a constant dialogue about any given project or author, whether we think it works, whether it doesn't. The other thing I'll say about series, some of our series editors take a very hands-on approach to working with the authors whose books appear in their series. Others are very hands-off and simply leave it to me and the peer reviewers to get the book into the shape that it needs to be. A series doesn't make or break a book, I want to add. Some people think there's a certain amount of prestige in publishing in a particular series, or with a particular group of authors who have already appeared in that series. And I think there is some truth to that, but there's still books that we're quite interested in and we publish all the time that don't fit neatly into one of those series, and we pursue them as kind of standalone offerings on our list. They'll get marketed along with all the other books in a given series. They'll be at the same conferences that all the other books are in a particular series. So a series often is a recruiting tool, but it doesn't make or break, I think, any given book that we choose to publish. And I'll stop there.
Great. Dave and Jenny, do you want to talk about how the model for acquisition and series editors works a little bit differently at Parlor?
Sure. That was a great overview, Dan, of a lot of the way that we work with series and acquisitions and so on. Our situation is a little bit different, though. We don't have an institutional review board or a larger editorial board. And so that means that essentially I'm the one that gives the final approval, but that's always based on what the series editors recommend to me, and they are acquisition editors and series editors, usually very involved in trying to find manuscripts and suitable authors, and then also working with authors to develop their ideas so that when it comes time for outside peer review, for example, that the submissions will do well. So there's development, editing involved also. Um, my role, I'm always looking for projects that I can pass to a particular series editor. We have, I think, 16 or 17 of them. Um, and yeah, so that's our situation. We always encourage authors to try to target a submission for a series. Um, like Alabama, we will do books that are part of a general list if they're really good projects and don't fit a series automatically or easily. But one thing that a series does for us is it makes marketing a little bit easier because there are particular audiences that will gravitate toward certain series, and we're familiar with the journals and the conferences and so on that support that area. So
Now, I'll just follow up really quickly on that, and to say that Dave and I and the other series editor, Thomas Ricker, work really closely together in a way. And so when Dave will send, a proposal if he gets it first or if I get it first, we'll kind of exchange and share it, right? And one of the things I think about first is, does this fit in that particular series, the parameters? So, when I look at the Lauer series, I think, that is in honor of Janice Lauer and her legacy. So what are the kinds of things that she, centered her career on, or what are the kinds of things that I think she would think are really important in the field? And I just saw her this morning. I just went and visited her. So I kind of try to think that way, rhetorical theory, rhetorical history. And she wanted me to pass along to everyone that the field needs good books. It's so important, she said, when I told her about this. So I think, I think about that. That's the first thing I think about. Does this fit into the series? And then, and then look at it closer, right? Read it closer. If it does fit, then where is it in this stage? Is it ready to, for us to see a full submission? Is it need some more development? Or maybe if it doesn't fit in the series, what series does it fit into? Where does it go? Is this something, as Dave said, that might be in a general catalog at Parlor, or does it belong in a different series, or is it not ready? But where is it, and we do a lot of exchanges on this. Dave and I and Thomas talk a lot about what we receive and where it's at.
Good. Well, that takes us to two of the primary audiences, for early stages of a book: your acquisitions editor and your series editor, who may or may not be the same person. But Aurora and Ryan, I'm wondering if you could clarify for us the role of the editorial board in all of this. We hear about the board, we hear the board has made a decision, but we don't always know what it is the board does.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. I think it's a requirement for all university presses, or at least university presses that are part of the Association of University Presses, to have all of their books that bear the imprint reviewed and approved by a faculty editorial board. So at Penn State, our board consists of probably maybe 15 faculty members in various disciplines. And their job basically is to take a look at the peer review process to make sure that the peer review protocol was followed. And then they also evaluate the scholarship. I think in most cases for our board, they'll typically defer to the recommendations of the readers and defer to the expertise of the readers. But they also offer suggestions and even, help in some cases, develop a project. So for any manuscript to kind of move into production, it has to go before the board, and basically, I will take along a proposal, the reader reports, the manuscript, and the board will review all those materials before making a decision.
Great. Let's switch gears just a little bit here and talk about you made it through all the rounds of approval and are thinking about, you know, how you want your book to circulate in the world. And that's something the press has also given a lot of thought to when it comes to levels of open access and venues for open access. And I know we have a wide range of opinions and policies amongst everyone on this panel about that issue. So I'm wondering, you know, how are you thinking about, you know, if books go on Google Books eventually after they're published, if you use Creative Commons licenses or not, even how you're thinking about the roles of dissertations that have been placed in open access repositories prior to then, you know, being developed into books. So, who wants to start us off with this?
Well, I could say a few words about it, and then I'll pass the baton. Very early in Parlor Press's existence, we partnered with the WAC Clearinghouse on 2 series. One is called The Reference Guides to Rhetoric and Composition. Janice Lauer's book and Charles Baserman's books were the first ones in that series. Those are like really long bibliographical essays that cover a kind of whole area of research. For Janice Lauer, it was invention, and for Baserman, it was writing across the curriculum. Those were made open source, Creative Commons. No, those are actually copyrighted with the author and Parlor Press, but they're released as open access texts and published at the WAC Clearinghouse and Parlor Press, and then also sold in print. The second series was Perspectives on Writing, and those are Creative Commons licensed to the authors, made available online for free, and then also released in print versions, and simultaneously also. That series has been very successful. One of the books, Aseo Inoue's book, won 4C's Book of the Year a couple of years ago, which was a first for an open access text. An incredible amount of work that series has been, and Mike Palmquist and the WAC Clearinghouse are the kind of the front end of that whole project. For authors, one of the benefits has been exposure. So many people have downloaded those books. It's incredible. One consequence we wanted to study was whether or not print sales would be affected. And generally not. In fact, Baserman, Palmquist, and I and David Russell published an article on this where we studied the downloads and print sales and all of that about 10 years ago, and found that the print sales were actually better for those books than they would be for a typical series. The idea being that people were more likely to know about the books because they were open access and wanted print copies just for archival purposes, or that's the way they prefer to read a longer book, that sort of thing. It's somewhat risky for a press, I think, to do that because you never know. We have had books that they're downloaded hundreds of thousands of times and maybe sell 50 copies and have taken quite a bit of work to produce. So that might make you a little bit hesitant to do more of those. We have people request free printed desk copies for books that are already open access. which we have to politely decline. You can already get the free book online. We're not going to send you a free printed one as well. That's been a little bit of a mystery to me. But it's been fun. And for Mike Palmquist and I, we got into this whole business because we are strong advocates of making our research available to the widest possible community. And that was one way to do it. So I'll leave it at that.
Dan, how has Alabama been thinking about this? And I know this is especially challenging for everyone now, especially in the current budgetary situation, to think about production cost and free books, just everything that goes into this. And you guys have taken a somewhat different approach. So how has that worked for you?
Well, we're really coming at it from two different directions. One is just an openness to looking at open access opportunities that are available to us and that are likely forthcoming. In fact, there's almost a day-long seminar next week that's being hosted by the Association of University Presses on TOME, T-O-M-E, which means Towards the Open Monograph Ecosystem, because all 120 university presses are contending with open access in one way or another. Some are moving into it aggressively. Some are taking more of a wait and see attitude. We're kind of doing both. One of the problems that concerns us, and I'll be curious to see how this is addressed next week, is that the presses that are really jumping into open access monographs, the most all have their own kind of proprietary platforms for them. I don't know, I'm just looking here. It's like University of California Press has Luminos, Minnesota has Manifold, West Virginia has Vega, Michigan has Hydra, Johns Hopkins has Muse Open. They're all wonderful names. I'd love to come up with some more, but it's hard to know which of these many open access platforms, and bless them all for doing this and putting the time and expense and energy into looking at these. But it almost feels like we're kind of waiting to see which of these shakes out before we can start to engage more. And it's almost like a Betamax VHS situation, or we're kind of waiting to see what the standard's going to be before we can start putting all of our eggs into one basket. So we're looking at developments on all of these and seeing which of these is going to be most fruitful for us. The other direction in which we're coming at this is that we are working with authors who are able to bring their books to us on the condition that they be made open access, and they bring financial support to make that happen. A couple of them have been authors based at US institutions. A number of the ones that we're working with right now are in the European Union. Because of the universities that they're affiliated with mandate and open access, if they're to publish, by publishing with the US press, they're able to actually bring, more than enough financial support to us for us to be able to underwrite the costs of editing, typesetting, printing, paper binding, e-formatting. We'll be able to break even on that book and thereby make it open access. And those are some of the things that we're working on now. I've seen a lot more of them in the last 6 to 12 months than I have in my entire time. These kinds of authors who are coming to us with, if you can commit to open access and I can bring you this amount of subsidy, can you make it open access? And more often than not, we're saying yes. And so those are some of are going to be more of our first entries into this ecosystem until we know what kind of becomes the common denominator for university presses generally. I'd be curious to hear from the other panelists too, because I know you're all maybe thinking about it in similar or different ways.
Ryan, how is Penn State thinking about this?
Yeah, I think that our approach is similar to yours, Dan. We have published some volumes open access on the condition that a subsidy is provided to allow us to recoup our investment on the book. I mean, some of our, even one of our rhetoric books, we have opened up, say for a month or 2 months at a time, especially if the subject matter is particularly relevant. I think we're looking for more opportunities to make our books available open access. I think the trick is how to recoup our investment, and that's a huge challenge. I don't think in the near future, I don't think we're going to be opening up books for open access, but I think so for the time being we'll be kind of doing the standard model, but I know that we are very interested in doing more in the future.
Great, thank you. Switching over to our Q&A, we're getting some good questions about this, and some of them really are about the money side of this, which is not something that often gets frankly discussed. But Elizabeth Kimball just asked, what are some of the sources for the subsidy funding that you're mentioning? This is a question for Dan, but it's really a question for anyone. Is it coming from grants or foundations or their own universities, or do you know?
They really come from a lot of different sources. For most of the really academic books, they're coming from the author's institution, either their department or their office of research. It can be, sometimes also I work with authors who simply have money that is given to them as a part of their research line that they can use to help underwrite certain costs as well. That's really more typical of the kind of subsidy that we deal with on academic books. This isn't really germane to this audience, but we also get a lot of subsidies from, this really has more to do with trade books and fine art coffee table books and things like that, where we get support from state art agencies, or we partner with a museum, or and we've done books on we did a book on motorcycling Alabama, and there was a race car museum that underwrote the costs of that. Or we do a book on a particular Southern foodway, and some food company helped us underwrite the costs for that. Those are private sources, but I shouldn't even be talking about those here because it's not relevant, but mostly the author's home institutions.
Wonderful, thanks for clearing that up. One other question related to the money side of this, and this is a question that came up in the last one also. Often authors wonder, is there money to be made for Rec Comp scholars and publishing books? Do we do advances? Do we do royalties? So I think that's something that's commonly wondered about, but not often asked. So Aurora, you want to address that?
Sure, yeah. I come from the trade commercial publishing world prior to university presses, so I've seen sort of both sides of this equation, and obviously every university press or scholarly press is going to operate a little bit differently, but for the most part, there's not money in it for any of us. If you get lucky, there are royalties in most cases, but the amount of those royalties is not going to be a lot because of you know, the volume of sales that we're looking at in a relatively compact field or discipline. So I would say, you know, from a university press, you can typically expect a royalty. If others here disagree, let me know. But on the advanced side, at least for South Carolina, that's pretty infrequent for monographs. If there's, you know, a situation where there's competition between different presses for a project, and the thing that's really going to help the author decide one way or the other is if they can have a little bit of money up front as an advance to help them pay for indexing or something like that, then sometimes we can make it happen. But in COVID, that's gotten even more difficult. So I would say advances, very infrequent, royalties always, the amount of money that comes out of it, not a lot. Something interesting I've been seeing recently, though, that does apply to sort of rhetoric and literary studies is the chance for subsidiary rights income. So if, you know, if we're able to sell rights to a chapter of your book for some other use, for some sort of anthology from another publisher or something like that, then you can see a fairly reasonable return, but that is really a case-by-case basis and maybe something that happens 2 or 5 or 7 years after the book is published.
Great, thanks for such a thorough answer on that. One of the questions we're getting here, quite a few versions of this question, is I wonder if one of you can map the timeline generally, or just the stages that a book goes through. You know, you talk to a promising author at a conference and say, yes, you know, we're very interested in this book, and they send you a prospectus that meets the guidelines that you published on your website. What happens then, and how does that book move through the stages to eventually being a book on Amazon out in the world? Anyone want to take that one? Ryan.
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. So yes, at Penn State we do peer review in most cases prior to contracting. So once we get a proposal, if it's proposed for a series, then I'll share it with the series editors. And if we feel like it's a good project and a good fit for the series, we'll invite the full manuscript for peer review. Typically, we send out the manuscript to 2 readers in the field. We ask them to return their reports in 6 to 8 weeks. And oftentimes, I don't know about oftentimes, but sometimes it's a little bit longer. And then once we have the reports, the assessments basically determine how we can move forward. If the reports are fairly positive, we can take the project to our faculty board right away. If the reports recommend revision, and then we work with the series editors and the author to come up with a plan for revision. Our board meets 5 times a year during the academic year. So once we have the support we need from the peer reviewers to publish the manuscript, then we take the project to the board. Once we have approval from the board, we then begin contracting. And after a project is contracted, we allow the author to make final revisions, and then we begin production. Our production cycle right now for most of our rhetoric books is between probably 9 and 12 months, depending on how many books we have in the pipeline. So I guess from start to finish, if you submit a manuscript and it sails through peer review and gets board approval and into production relatively quickly, you can probably have a book in, I don't know, a year and a half. That would be moving pretty quickly. But in most cases, it's probably a little bit longer, maybe closer to 2.
Wonderful, thanks so much. Does anyone else want to amend or adjust anything? Does your timeline vary? That sounds pretty standard to me.
Yeah, that's fairly typical, though. At Parlor, we don't have the editorial review board or university board to take things to, but all the other components are there. I try to promise authors that once a book has been fully accepted, reviewed, series editors have signed off, and they submit a finished manuscript for production, that it can take typically about 9 months before a book gets out. We try to hurry that a little bit more quickly, but a lot of it depends on uh, um, the time of the year and whether the copy editors we work with are free. Of course, there has to be copy editing and then proofing and layout and all that stuff. So at 9 months is even pushing it fairly quickly. I did want to, somebody asked about the issues with open access and royalties earlier, and subventions. Um, Parlor open access books, there are no subventions for those. Those don't have to be subsidized in the usual way, though we have had several times authors approach us who already have some kind of funding, and they want books that would normally be print only or print and ebook, but not open access, to be made open access immediately. So that's certainly possible. But it was just the nature of those series that we did that we didn't require any kind of subvention. So I just wanted to mention that. And in one of the series that's completely open access, Perspectives on Writing, the authors do not get royalties on those books. And so that's kind of their subvention, basically. It means that the WAC Clearinghouse or Parlor doesn't have to track their royalties, which is a very time-intensive process. So that's the author's kind of buy-in for those. Another series, the authors do get royalties, and it works the usual way. So those are some more of the economic issues with open access that I thought I'd throw out there.
Great. Thank you. I want to clarify something we said earlier. We have a question here that asks if it's possible to publish a book if the author doesn't have supplemental funding. And so I think it's important that we're clear that you can absolutely publish a book without supplemental funding. It's a question of whether or not it's open access. But I think it's also worth taking just a minute to talk about the cost an author can run into, such as indexing, such as book permission. So can we take just a few minutes to address that? And does anyone particularly want to take that on? Dan, do you want to take a swing at it?
Yeah. Any book that we're considering for publication, unless it's like a heavily illustrated art book or an academic book that involves a lot of like color illustrations, which are kind of expenses that are above and beyond, we don't require funding from any of our authors for anything. We're not going to make publication of any of our books contingent upon the receipt of any kind of financial support. Those are costs we're all willing to bear and risks we're willing to take. So no. Now, if an author is proposing a book that is feature enhanced, let's say, and they want a lot of bells and whistles, full color throughout, or it's extremely long. Those are some things we can run into where financial support would help. If we can't get that, we'll still do the book. We just may have to bake the extra costs into the price of the book. But even for a book, and I would say 90% to 95% of our books don't require any funding from the author. Even for those, the author is going to incur expenses. They don't have to, but they likely will. Those can come in many different ways. Our authors are responsible for indexing, for the index of their book. Some of our authors do it themselves, and we have guidelines for them, and they save money by doing it themselves. Some of our authors hate indexing more than anything and will spend the money to pay a freelance indexer to do it for them. There are sometimes permission costs. If there are permissions that are required for quoting, using, or reproducing copyrighted material, they may have to pay those permissions. We won't. By the same token, I try to help most of my authors work around those by establishing ways they can use that material in a fair use context and not invoke any permission fees. I'm a very strong advocate for fair use, principle in US copyright law. And I think especially for people who are studying forms of rhetoric or public address or visual rhetoric or digital rhetoric, they should have the right to reproduce a lot of that material without asking anyone's permission. That's a different issue. Aside from permissions and indexing, I don't know. Cost of an author photo, maybe. Maybe I'm forgetting some things.
I think that pretty much covers it. Does anyone else remember anything else?
Yeah, that was a good overview of all the possible expenses that might be involved. Yeah, I knew where I was going with that, but now I lost it. I was looking at the chat box at the same time. Multitasking in Zoom is not good.
Well,
So let's move on.
We are getting a very polite reminder, a useful reminder, that one of the audiences we promised we talked about is reviewers, and we have not done that, and we have 13 minutes left. So what advice do we have about responding to reviewers, working with your editor to listen to reviewers? What useful things might we say?
I could say a few things just to start. When we have a project that's ready for outside review, and we kind of already done some vetting, either the series editors and I, or maybe we've even asked some quick reads, proposals. We try to shoot for the top. If your book is about a couple of major figures in the field and they're prominent throughout its pages, we're going to possibly ask one of them to be a reviewer. Not so that they can approve how they're treated in the book, but if the argument is fair and well reasoned and well supported and so on. But we'll also try to find a balanced or another balance with somebody who's in the book, with somebody who's not in the book, not discussed in it, but who's widely considered to be an expert in the field. And so these are taken very seriously, and I always recommend to the authors that they take the reviews seriously. I will not give the reviews back to the authors unless the reviews are really serious and good and helpful. You know, you'll hear all these stories about reviewer number 2. With journal publishing, it may be a little bit different. If you get 2 reviews back of your book from a university press, you should take both very seriously. You know, as an editor, I want to see how an author can work with that kind of feedback and criticism, and that becomes part of the evaluation process as a whole. If you can't work with what a reviewer says and that we think is a legitimate criticism, then that can be a complicating factor, to put it obtusely.
Well, something to add to that. Aurora, I know you and I have talked recently about reviewer feedback. Are there things you want to say?
I mean, I think building from that, when I'm sending reviews back to an author, I'm trying to frame them and tell the author what I hope they're going to get out of it. And if, you know, if the reviews are difficult in a way that I think is going to make it hard for the author to revise and to make this book work, if these are reviews that are saying, this is probably better as a couple of articles, or really, really need to go rethink this whole thing, then I may, you know, be framing it in that way. But in many cases, the reviewers are saying, I think this book should probably be published, but it's not quite there yet. And so in those cases, I want the author to really take seriously the fact that this reviewer is encouraging them to sort of do the work to get it to that top level that it can be, and that even if they have criticism, they're not criticizing for the sake of criticizing, they're criticizing for the sake of helping this book be the best possible version of itself. So to sort of start from that point, if the reviews are somewhat negative but leaning towards, yes, this should be a book, start from that point of, you know, accepting that someone in the field is saying, yes, this should be a book, and then thinking about that constructive criticism and what can be done with it. And then I guess this all comes back to that question of audience of, you know, I want you to, as an author, do this revision memo as a tool for yourself to guide what you're working on. But the memo is also something that I'm considering. As David said, you know, we're thinking about how you work with criticism, how you are able to incorporate that into your work. So I'm the audience in some way. But the editorial board, faculty board is also the audience for this. And so they want to see as well that you're taking these comments seriously. Sometimes, you know, a reviewer might get it wrong. And in those cases, it might be better to have a conversation with the acquisitions editor even before writing your memo, to sort of work on how you want to work through that. That can be a really helpful time to have a series editor involved, I think, because they can bring sort of another perspective and help us think about how we're weighing those criticisms and whether it's something that needs to be incorporated into a revision.
Jenny, since you are our resident series editor, what are your thoughts
Yeah,
on
I was going to actually follow up on that, because series editors have a really, at least at Parler, I think, have an important role in being able to be kind of a mediator and be able to read those comments, those reviewer feedback and reports, and be able to say, here's how you can address this, especially if the author isn't quite sure. How do I address this criticism? What do I do with it? That's when, you know, Dave can say, oh, why don't you ask Thomas and Jenny about this? Or Dave actually has even asked, like, I've got these reports. Can we talk about them a little bit? This is how I'm thinking about framing them. Or, you know, what do you think? And then we can work with the author to really take those comments and do something with it. And I think both Dave and Aurora are correct that how you frame and how you respond to the comments are really important. And that's, of course, another example of yourself as a rhetorician too, right? Saying, oh, I didn't address these comments because they're just whatever, right? X, Y, and Z, versus here's how I really tried to address these comments, and here's how I interpreted them and fit them into, you know, what I'm doing in this manuscript and what I'm trying to accomplish in this manuscript. And so I think having that kind of attitude toward them is really effective, but also reaching out for help if you need help translating, right, what they mean.
Great, thank you. Anna Ryan, do you have anything to add to this?
No, these are all really great and helpful comments. I think maybe one point I would make is I often encourage my authors to read the reports carefully, maybe even read it once, and if the report is critical, step away and then come back. Oftentimes, I can get responses from authors that indicate to me that the author has not read the reports carefully. So that might, I think that it is helpful to do that, because most of the time I find that readers want to see a project succeed. And so in many cases, the criticism is constructive, I think. And if there is criticism, sometimes I suggest to the author that maybe the criticism isn't because the author is doing something wrong, or the analysis is not correct or accurate, but that the reader is not understanding what the argument is or what the analysis is trying to say, and therefore maybe the analysis just needs to be clarified.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Ryan just said. How we pick the readers we go to is an important part of the process. Sometimes I have readers in mind. Sometimes the series editor is dead set on at least one person who should be a reader. We ask all of our authors to suggest the name, even as a part of their proposal. Our guidelines ask the authors to list 4 or 5 scholars who they think might be good peer reviewers and why. Sometimes we'll go to one of the readers that an author suggests, and then the second reader might be someone we want. Sometimes we don't listen to what the author suggests, and sometimes we do. But having an author suggest who they think might be good readers helps tell me a lot about the kind of orbit in which they see their work floating, if for nothing else. But, it's a lot of time, it's an investment, it's time for the scholars, it's waiting time for us. We wouldn't have bothered, none of us would have bothered to send it out for review if we didn't think it merited peer review. So we're not going to send it to someone who we think is going to shoot it down from the get-go, or who comes from a completely different ideological perspective. The point is to get helpful developmental feedback. Sometimes these are the first people who are reading your work who weren't on your committee, and what they have to say, seeing how your book is being received by people who are otherwise complete strangers to you, I think is an important part of the process. Responding to the reports, regardless of what they say, constructively, even if you disagree with them, but not defensively, is really an important part of the process. As someone else was saying, when I have to take a project before our board and they see that the author is screaming the entire way and being defensive the entire way, well, sometimes those don't even get to the board because, but they really do. Our board likes it a lot when they see an author appreciative and taking seriously the peer reviews that they've received, even if they don't agree with every point.
Right.
One thing I thought I would mention too, Krista, and this, when Ryan was talking, I remembered this because he's a Penn State professor emeritus, Jack Seltzer. Jack always encouraged people to seek reviews before they submitted a proposal to a press, and to actually pay a reviewer, somebody they didn't know. They could have a colleague arrange a review for their proposal, come up with $500 and pay an outside reviewer to give feedback before submission. And I thought, wow, that could be a really good idea. So I just wanted to throw that out there as another option for people to think about if they had that kind of support where they could do that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. This has been really helpful. I've learned things here and I have published a book. So I appreciate this. And I know our audience does too. We're going to go ahead and end this portion of the program. Eric's been putting in links over in the chat to the individual press meeting rooms. And you're welcome to come meet our editors. Also, we're going to be sending the questions that are in the Q&A queue that we haven't gotten to yet over to everyone in the meeting room. So you'll have more opportunity to discuss those. And, we look forward to seeing you there. And if you're headed off for the day, then have a wonderful weekend.